What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over changing our crosshairs depending on the weapon we are using. So in the previous episode we went over simple crosshairs logic. Sorry, it's weird to say, like, I want to say crosshair, but I know them together are crosshairs. So we went over simple crosshairs logic, and basically what we did is if we were sprinting, or we shoot and then we reload, or we aim down sights, any of those cases will end up getting rid of the crosshairs from the screen. That way we can't shoot at the moment, it doesn't look like we can. When we pick up weapons though, the crosshairs should be able to change. It's not required, not all games do this, but you can see the crosshairs are now thicker, and they have, they're a little bit closer together as well, less of a gap. Like this is what the other one looks like. And then we can go to this one, which I made wacky. I basically just made it like 2 arrows with a dot in the middle to show you like a range of where these bullets can go. We don't have anything to really change the range. It's kind of just based off of where the weapon is. We don't have any sort of projectile modifications yet on our weapons, and that's perfectly normal and fine. We'll get to that later. But I just made something that's a little bit oddly shaped to show you that you can do this with a bunch of different stuff. With a shotgun, you'll probably make it more rectangular or something along those lines. That way you can see the spread of the weapon and where it could hit and everything like that. So with that in mind, that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be able to change our crosshairs based on the weapon that we are using. And all of our other logic will remain for what we've done so far with the making it disappear or show up and making it the right size on the HUD, all that sort of stuff. The only thing we won't be covering today that we still need to cover will be the dynamic crosshairs. So these are all for static crosshairs. When we want our crosshairs to actually update, say we're moving and they should spread out and things like that to show where the bullets could actually land. That is something that we will be covering as well, but it won't be in this episode. However, the concepts that we're using in this episode to actually change the crosshairs from, one object to another will still be relevant for that episode. We're just going to have to change some more things about them. So it's not just a static image, but we're really going to basically create the crosshairs in Unreal. We'll go over that more when we get to it, but just know that won't be working by the end of today's episode, but we will be getting to it. So otherwise, let's hop right into it. If you haven't watched any episode of the series, we're getting there. This is still the youngest series that we have, but it's about 30 episodes in, so pretty cool. We're starting to make some good progress, and it's starting to come to life. Can't wait to see where we can take this series. Really excited about it. If you want to check it out, I'll link the entire playlist right here in the top right corner. It has every episode that got us to this point. I'll keep you up to date on the series. If you don't care about that, but you do care about crosshairs, I'll show you the very first episode of the crosshairs, little mini series within this tutorial series right here. This is part 1, where we initially made our simple crosshair setup. Alright, and with that, we're good to go. So, really, all we have to do today is, like I said, when we switch weapons, or any other case when you want to be able to change the crosshairs, we need to be able to change the image that's on the HUD. So it needs to link back to the weapons that we are using, and they should have a specific type of crosshairs that they use. So they should be specific to the weapon, so we need to assign them one, and then we need to make sure that the HUD references the correct one based on the weapon that the character is using. So to do this, in our baseweapon.h in our code class, what I've done is I've scrolled down to where my variables are, and I've added a textured 2D pointer, and I've called it crosshairs. As the comment says, it's the crosshairs the weapon will have when blind firing, not aiming down sights. And so what a textured 2D is, you hear texture in Unreal. Basically, you can think of it as an image. It's not the same thing, so don't think of it as that forever. But for now, before we get into more of that stuff, you can think of this as this is going to be the image that we put in. We're going to basically make a brush out of this texture, and then the brush is going to become the image on the HUD. So this is essentially, it is quite literally a texture. But for now, you can think of it as this is what we're going to use for our picture for our crosshairs. So once you make this, you're good to go. Now, this is a pointer, so we will have to assign it, but you don't have to assign it in the code unless you're using your file paths and putting texture files and images in the code. You definitely can do that. It can be beneficial performance-wise from time to time. In this case, I don't believe it really matters, as we will need to access it in the blueprint for the HUD anyway. So whether we load it in here or in the blueprint shouldn't make too much of a difference, but feel free to do it as you please. I did not set a default for it. It is a pointer, so you might want to set it to default in the constructor, but again, it's really not necessary. And okay, there we go for the weapon, but we need to still figure out a way to change it on the HUD. Even if the weapons have them, the HUD only has one image that it has. We need to change that specific crosshairs and reticle, and we need to change it to what we actually expect to see. So to do that, I'm going to set up an event that the character can call. That way, that specific character and their HUD can get all the information that they need. In the previous episode, we set up a function called setCrossHairsVisibility. And now what we're going to do is we are going to make a custom event for changing the crosshairs as well. So my functions are they're all over the place on this one. So forgive me for that. But basically, I'm going to move this here so that you can see them next to each other. There we go. Much cleaner. So we have set crosshairs visibility from the last time, and now I have change crosshairs. So make sure it is a blueprint implementable event, because the change crosshairs part of it is changing it on the HUD. And I also want it to be blueprint callable because we could change it as soon as we switch weapons in the code. So we could call this function in the code in our switch weapon function. There's a problem with that though. That switch weapon does fire instantly to go to the next weapon that we're at. So we probably don't want to bring out the crosshairs when switching weapons immediately. Really what we should do is wait for the animation of the weapon swap to finish so that the weapon is completely ready and able to be shot. And when that is the case, we should enable the crosshairs. Now, we don't have that sort of logic set up yet. It is just we switch weapons and then it's there. That's fine. For now, it's fine. So you could do it here, but thinking ahead, we probably want to wait for that to occur. That could be done through either an animation blueprint anim notify, or it could be done through a basic blueprint event or call when we reach a certain point. So because of that, I'm going to make it a blueprint implementable event and blueprint callable, so we can call it in the blueprint and then also just do the logic in the blueprint for it, since we're doing it right on the HUD anyway. Okay, so you don't have to call this anywhere in code. Just create it here in your character. And then once you do, launch Unreal like we always do, and then go into that. In Unreal, what we're going to do is we are going to go to our character blueprint, base character BP. This is not only the character we play as, but this character will spawn a HUD on their own. We have a HUD reference you can see as a variable. That's because up toward the top somewhere in begin play, we create the HUD widget and then we set a reference to it. This will also be specific to every single character. So outside of some networking things, since we don't have networking finished yet, you will be able to see this when you're watching someone else. The HUD assigned to them will be the one that gets relayed back to the spectator, and they'll be able to see the correct crosshairs as well. So if you go to down to the bottom, or really wherever, but I wanted it to be next to the set crosshairs visibility again, we are going to get that event that we made that was blueprint implementable. And so that was called change crosshairs in the code. So if I just type event change crosshairs, it'll come up like this. And then we can do this logic that you see here. So what's happening here is, first of all, first things first, I am making sure that our HUD is valid. If our HUD isn't valid for any reason, or there isn't a HUD, you know, maybe you're playing blind and you never spawned a HUD period, then it wouldn't really make sense to be trying to display that. But also, just if something happened, or if we're in some state of the game where the HUD has been cleaned up, maybe we're in between rounds, you don't want to do this. A, it'll crash because we don't have the simple crosshairs image that we need, but also it's just unnecessary operations occurring. So let's go to our HUD widget really quickly, because I will show you what everything is. So in our character HUD, last time we set up these simple crosshairs, and right now it's not showing up as any other, any of the other types. We only have the one that we set up. We could change it manually if we'd like, change it to the different versions. But really, that's up to you what you want as the default on the HUD. Really, it's just a good positional thing to show you. This one's going to update, based on the logic we're setting up now. But you can see this is the simple crosshairs that I'm referencing in the character BP. So it's this image that we put in as the picture here. That's what you need. So you should already have this, but make sure that it is a variable if you skip the previous episode, because just like that, we're going to need to grab it. So you get your HUD reference. I convert it to a validated get. Basically, only if it's valid do we want to do this. I drag off of it, get that image. And then once I have that, I can actually call something that is called set brush. Set brush is essentially, again, if we're thinking of it just simply right now, what it really does is it's going to set the image to become that image. That's the easiest way to think of it at the moment. There are more complicated things you can do with it. But really, set brush in terms of this image is going to just make this image change to whatever brush we're giving it. So if we give it a different crosshairs image here, then it's just going to change it's going to change to that image. It's going to change to that type of crosshairs. Okay. And so the way we actually get the data that we need, though, is remember we put the crosshairs variable on the base weapon code class. We need to go to our individual weapons. So if I go to base weapon, which is my blaster here, this is the one we'll start out. Now that we had the variable in there, if we go to class defaults when we're in each of our weapons, we will have this thing right here. It'll be crosshairs and it will have an empty image. You can now go select your images that you want. So I wanted simple crosshairs 2 for the blaster. The assault rifle will have simple crosshairs 3. And then the submachine gun will have simple crosshairs 4. And so now the weapons themselves will have a reference to this. And we can grab that texture and make an image out of it. So the way that really works is pretty simple. We could do it a few ways. You could have passed it into this function to, pass in the current weapon the user has. You could also just do this right here where we're going to get whatever weapon is currently out and then get the crosshairs for that weapon. That's what I've opted to do. This should always be valid because we do some checks to make sure our weapons array is valid before doing things like switching and shooting and using. So really it should be good enough, but feel free to check for validity before doing this. Really all we do is we get our weapons array. Whoops, I did that completely backward. Get weapons. And then we literally drag off of that and type get. Copy is fine in this case because we're not changing anything on it. We're just grabbing data from it. We want to drag off of this and get the weapon index. The weapon index is the index of the weapon that is currently out. Each weapon does have an index that we set up in the series. 0, 1, 2. So we know, if it's this index, it's this type of weapon. So because of that, we just basically get the weapon at the index that the player currently has. And then this is the weapon right here. So this would be, the blaster, the assault rifle, the submachine gun. And then we drag off that and get crosshairs. Now, off of this one, we need to make brush from texture, and as it says, it creates a slate brush from a texture 2D. When you want to change the image on a widget, this is an image object. The only way to do that, well, there are a few ways to do it, but the only way to do it from here really is the set brush command. There's no set image, okay? You can set this, all right? And then if you passed it, an actual image object here, sure, that would work. But we don't have an image object. We made it a texture 2D pointer. So what we can do for now is just drag off of that, say make brush from texture. And then you can have this slate brush return value. So in your set brush off of your simple crosshairs, you drag that into the in brush. Now the width and the height here don't matter. It says when less than or equal to 0, the height of the brush will default to the height of the texture, and same with the width. Now, if they're 0, then they're going to default to the height and width of the texture, which is what we want in this case. You could make them bigger or smaller, and you could adjust them if you wanted to here. It could be useful to stretch out some of your images if some are bigger or smaller in size. But we are going to go over the dynamic crosshairs, as I mentioned, and we will have to manually do a lot of that stuff anyway. So I'm not worried about it for now. I just left it alone so it was the size of the texture. Now, really, that's good to go. But what you do still have to do is actually call this event. We never call this event anywhere, so these crosshairs will never change at the moment. All I'm opting to do now is whenever we switch weapons, that's the only time I'm doing it, I'm calling the event. So really what I did is I waited until after the weapon was attached to the character's hand. So logically it made sense that I would be able to see the crosshairs. But really, again, we'll probably want to, when we have a weapon swapping animation, we will most likely want to play after the weapon gets swapped and when the other weapon is fully pulled out and ready to be shot. So in my event switch weapon, I go through my logic to determine what weapon should be attached and where. And then no matter what the path is, I just call it change crosshairs. And guys, that is pretty much it, believe it or not. That's all you should need to do, and at this point you'll be able to have different crosshairs for your weapons. They can still line up wherever you'd like, so you can change them like we were able to in the last episode. You can make them work with hit scan or actual projectiles. Up to you. And this can give a lot of life to your game. Because now you can make each weapon unique in more ways than one. So if this helped you make your simple crosshairs a little bit more unique and interesting, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do. It's completely free and I really appreciate it. I do want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon supporters. Thank you guys for continuing to show me all the love and appreciation that you do. I really, really am grateful for that. And I love working on these, so I'm always excited to show you what we can come up with and do next. If you had any issues, feel free to join the Discord community. I'll be happy to help you out with any that you had, and it's completely free. No worries there. But that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.